She knocked on my door at 9 in the morning on a Saturday, which is the kind of thing that should be a crime. I hadn't slept well. I never slept well the first week in a new place. And this apartment, third floor, corner unit, old building that creaked like it had opinions about the weather, was no exception. I had boxes still stacked in the living room, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has moved too many times and stopped pretending each new place was a fresh start. I opened the door expecting the landlord. She was not the landlord. She stood in the hallway with a plate covered in foil, wearing a dark green sweater and the expression of someone who had rehearsed what to say and was now doubting all of it. Dark hair, quiet eyes, the kind of stillness that isn't shyness but something more considered than that. She said, "I'm Lena. I live across the hall. I made too much food last night and it seemed wrong to let it go to waste." I looked at the plate, then at her. "You made too much food the night your new neighbor moved in." She held my gaze evenly. "Yes, that's a coincidence." "It is." I took the plate. "I'm Owen. Thank you." She nodded once like that was exactly the transaction she'd intended and walked back across the hall. The door closed with a quiet click. I stood holding a plate of food I hadn't asked for and thought, well, that was a person. And something in my chest shifted in a way four walls and a moving truck hadn't managed to do. But let me go back a little further, because the beginning always matters. My name is Owen Carr. I'm 31, a technical writer in Seattle, which means I spend my days translating complicated things into plain language and my evenings wondering why I'm better at that at work than in my actual life. I'd moved into the Caldwell Building on a Friday in early September because my lease had ended and I'd run out of reasons to stay where I was. Not because of a woman. I moved because I'm the kind of person who moves when things start to feel like furniture, familiar and functional, and devoid of surprise. 4 apartments in 6 years. I was good at moving, less good at what was supposed to come after. The building had probably been beautiful once in the 1940s, before the brass fixtures went green. Now it had the dignity of something that had outlasted most of what surrounded it. I liked it immediately. I liked it less at 9 in the morning on a Saturday when someone knocked. But then the door opened and there was Lena. I found out, over the following days, that her full name was Lena Park, that she'd lived in 3B for 2 years, that she worked as a freelance illustrator, that she had a cat named Gerald, who occasionally sat in the hallway like he was considering a change of address, and that she made too much food about once a week and regarded this as a logistical problem rather than a kindness. The second time she knocked was Tuesday evening. Rice and something with ginger that smelled like it had been made with actual intention. "You made too much food again." I have a portion problem. That seems like something a person could solve. "I'm working on it. Do you want this or not?" I took the plate. She turned to go. "Do you want to come in?" She paused just a second. "Not tonight," and she went back to her door. Not tonight, not no. I stood there thinking about what kind of person says not tonight to a stranger she's fed twice in 4 days. The kind of person I'd learn who had thought about it. The third time was Saturday again, a reasonable hour, and when I opened the door, she held 2 cups of coffee instead of a plate. I made too much coffee. A portion problem with coffee, too. It's a systemic issue. I stepped back. She came in, looked at the boxes I still hadn't unpacked, and the bookshelf that leaned slightly to the left, didn't say anything about any of it, handed me the coffee, and sat on the couch like she'd decided it was acceptable. We talked for 2 hours about the building, about Seattle, about whether working alone was better or just differently lonely than working in an office. At some point she asked how many times I'd moved. 4 in 6 years. She looked at her cup. "Are you running toward something or away from something?" "Probably away from something. I'm not entirely sure what." She nodded, like that was acceptable, didn't push, finished her coffee and stood. "Same time next week if you want. I'll be here." Same time next week became a thing. Not formal, not named, just a thing that happened. Saturday mornings, coffee, 2 hours, sometimes 3. I learned things about her in pieces, in asides, in what she said and deliberately didn't. That she'd grown up in Tacoma and moved to Seattle at 24 for a relationship that ended 18 months later, and stayed because leaving would have felt like admitting it was the only reason she came. That she liked mornings and drew late at night when the city went quiet. That she'd had one relationship since, and it ended a year ago. And she didn't talk about it in a way that told me it still had weight. I told her things too. That I'd been engaged briefly to a woman named Caroline who was certain about everything I was uncertain about, and the certainty had been the attraction and eventually the problem. That I had a habit of understanding a situation clearly and then doing nothing about it until it resolved itself without me. "That sounds lonely," she said. "It is, a little. Why don't you do something about it?" "I'm working on it." "Okay, let me know how that goes." It was the 5th Saturday when she said it. We'd been sitting on the couch and it had been a good morning, easy, and something in the air had been softer than usual. She was telling me about a project, an illustrated story about a lighthouse keeper, her voice slower and more open the way it got when she talked about work she actually cared about. And I was watching her and thinking things I'd been carefully not thinking for 4 Saturdays. She stopped mid-sentence. "I need to say something." "Okay." She set her cup down, looked at her hands, then at me with those direct, quiet eyes. "I like you, Owen. I like our Saturdays. I like that you're across the hall and easy to talk to and don't try to fill every silence. I hear a but coming. Don't fall for me." "Is that what's happening?" "I don't know. Maybe. I've done this before. The neighbor thing, the easy proximity thing. It started exactly like this, and it ended badly enough that I moved to a different building. I like this building. I like Gerald's access to the hallway. I don't want to complicate something that doesn't need to be complicated. So this is a warning. It's a request." I was quiet a moment. "Noted." She picked her coffee back up. "Thank you." We kept talking, finished the morning the way we always did. She left at noon. I sat afterward and thought about the difference between a warning and a request. A warning says, "Don't do this because it will go badly." A request says, "Don't do this because I'm afraid." I thought about the way she'd looked when she said it. Not certain, not cold. Careful? The way someone looks when they're trying to protect something they're not sure can survive being named. The Saturdays continued. Neither of us mentioned the conversation again, but something had changed in the texture of things, a small, careful awareness that hadn't been there before, or rather had been there, and now we both knew it. I started noticing things I'd been allowing myself not to notice. The way she tilted her head when thinking. The way she laughed at things specifically absurd rather than broadly funny. The way she always knew where she'd left off in a conversation from the week before. Gerald started coming over, sitting in the hallway and sometimes following me in with an evaluating expression. Lena said he was a good judge of character. I said I hoped I was passing, so far. 6 weeks after I moved in, the building had a boiler issue. 3 days without heat in October. The kind of damp cold that came through the walls no matter how many layers you wore. She came over the second evening without a plate or coffee, just knocked and said, "My apartment is uninhabitable. Can I work here tonight?" I said yes. She sat up at my kitchen table with her tablet and headphones and worked in silence for 3 hours while I sat on the couch doing the same. It was the most comfortable I'd felt in a new space in longer than I could remember, not because anything happened, because nothing needed to. At 11 she packed up, stood by the door. "Thank you. Any time." She looked at me for a moment. "You're making this difficult. I'm not doing anything." "I know. That's the problem." And she went back across the hall. The week after, she didn't knock on Saturday. I waited until noon, stopped waiting, went out, came back, and found her in the hallway with Gerald. "I'm sorry about last week. You don't need to apologize. I needed some space to think. Can I come in?" I stepped back. She sat on the couch, quieter than usual, Gerald on the other end monitoring the situation. After a long silence, "Be honest. Is this just proximity for you? Someone across the hall who brings you food and is easy to talk to? Or is it something else?" I looked at her a long moment. "You know it's something else." She looked at her hands. "Yes, I know. I've known for a while." Then what's the question, really? Whether I'm making a mistake again. I fell for my neighbor before and thought it was the proximity, and it turned out to be real, and then it ended, and I had to leave. I can't do that again. I like where I live. I like the alley garden and the elevator that takes its time, and I like— She stopped. "What do you like?" Very quietly, "I like that you're across the hall." The room was very still. "Lena, I'm not going anywhere. You move every 18 months. I moved because I had no reason to stay. That's different from having a reason and leaving. That's a significant distinction. You've thought about this." "I've thought about almost nothing else for 6 weeks. She almost smiled. Not quite. The almost was enough. I told you not to fall for me. I know. I tried. You didn't try very hard. I tried exactly as hard as you did. She went still, something moving through her expression she didn't entirely contain. That's not fair. It's accurate, though. She was quiet a long time. Gerald, satisfied, stretched with great ceremony and walked toward the door. I have been falling. For a while. I wasn't just warning you. I was warning myself. How did you know I'd fall too? She asked. Because the things you said when you told me not to fall for you were true, but you said them to me because you needed someone to hear them. Not as a rule. As a confession. She stared at me. I really wish you were worse at reading people. If this goes wrong, I have to move, she said. If this goes wrong, I'll move. You were here first. Something shifted in her face, the careful distance that had been there since the first morning with the plate of food she'd strategically made too much of. It moved, the way a door moves when someone finally decides to open it. You'd do that. I'd do that. She reached across the couch and rested her hand on mine, the way you set something down when you've been carrying it too long and finally found somewhere safe. Okay, just okay. But I'd learned by then that Lena's okays carried weight. I turned my hand over. She didn't pull away. We sat like that for a while, and the Saturday afternoon went on outside, and neither of us said anything else because nothing else needed to be said. That is not the end of the story. It's the end of the beginning of it, which is a different thing. What came after was not simple. Lena was not simple, which I'd known since the first plate of food called a portion problem with a completely straight face. She was careful in the way people are careful when they've been careless before, moving slowly and meaning it when she said she needed time. I unpacked my boxes. I hung the bookshelf properly. I started making coffee on Saturday morning so it was ready when she knocked, and then she started knocking before 9. And then she stopped knocking entirely and just let herself in with the spare key I'd given her around the 3rd month, which Gerald watched with the air of someone who'd predicted the outcome weeks ago. I stopped leaving. Not dramatically, just the way you stop doing something when the reason for it resolves. The apartment that had felt temporary felt like mine. The building felt like mine. And across the hall was a woman who made too much food and kept a cat with excellent judgment, and had told me very clearly not to fall for her, and had been falling herself the whole time. On a Saturday morning in March, 6 months after I moved in, she was at my kitchen table drawing and I was on the couch reading, and she said without looking up, I've been thinking about the lighthouse keeper. Most stay because it's the job. I want mine to stay because he found something worth staying for. I looked at her, still drawing. I think that's a better story. She looked up. You're still here. I told you I would be. She held my gaze a moment, then went back to drawing, and the morning went on around us the way good mornings do. She finished The Lighthouse Keeper that February. I was the first person she showed it to. She sat next to me on the couch with the tablet, went through it page by page without saying anything, letting the images speak, and I looked at each one the way she'd looked at things that mattered to me. At the end she asked what I thought. Why does he stay in the end? Because the light started to feel like his. Because he couldn't imagine another person knowing it the way he did. That's a good reason. I thought so. She closed the tablet, leaned back, said without looking at me, I put something in the dedication page. I want you to read it, but not right now. Later. Okay. It's embarrassing. More embarrassing than making too much food as a pretext to meet your new neighbor. I have told you 100 times that was a genuine portion. Problem. And I have believed you 0 of those times. She finally looked at me, trying not to smile. You are extremely annoying. You dedicated a book to me. I haven't confirmed that. You basically confirmed it. She turned her face toward the window. The alley garden, the city going on outside. The smile she was trying not to have happened anyway. I looked at the dedication page later that night. It said Thoreau, who stayed. 3 words. For someone who had once told me not to fall for her in a speech that was actually a confession, 3 words was the most concentrated thing she could have produced. I sat with them a long time in the apartment that didn't feel temporary anymore. In the building, I'd stopped making plans to leave. In the city I'd come to, not because I was running toward something but had somehow found it anyway. Spring came with the particular light Seattle saves for April, low and gold and gentle. One morning Lena appeared in the doorway at 7, wearing one of my sweaters, her coffee already made, which meant she'd let herself in with the ease of someone who no longer thinks about the gesture. "You're awake." "I am." She sat on the edge of the bed, looked out at the April light. After a while, "I have a question. The Caldwell has a one-bedroom opening on the second floor next month. I was thinking we spend most of our time in one apartment or the other anyway, and Gerald has essentially moved in here, and the space could be used for other things." "Like what?" "Like a studio, maybe. Or just space. Room for things to grow." She looked at me when she said it, not at the window, and I understood she wasn't talking about a studio. "Lena." "I know. I'm saying it sideways. You could say it directly." She took a breath. "I want to stop having an apartment across the hall. I want to have an apartment with you. I want Gerald to have an official address and not a commute. And I want—" She stopped, looked at her hands. "What do you want?" Very quietly, "I want to stop waiting to see if you stay. I want to just know." The April light lay across the floor between us. "Lena, I've been staying since October." "I know, but I want it to be a choice, not just something that happened. It's a choice. It's always been a choice. I just needed you to know I was making it." She looked at me a long moment, then set her coffee down, leaned over, and kissed me. Which wasn't the first time, but was the first time it felt like a conclusion to something, like a sentence that had finally found its period. She pulled back. Okay. She picked her coffee back up, looked at the window. Gerald, from the couch, let out a sound of great satisfaction. "I'm still a terrible portion controller." "I know." "You're going to be eating a lot of food." "I'm aware." She smiled. Fully, without holding it back, and outside the alley garden did whatever stubborn, improbable things it did in April, and the city woke up around us. And in the apartment, where I'd stopped counting the months because I'd stopped planning to leave, I understood something that had taken me 6 moves and 31 years to learn. You do not find home by looking for it. You find it by staying long enough to recognize it, by being still long enough to let it settle around you, by trusting the person across the hall who warned you not to fall, because that warning was the most honest thing she knew how to say. And she said it to you specifically, which was the whole point. She had warned me. I had not listened. She had been falling the whole time. And we had both, in our own careful ways, stayed. She said it once more, about a year in. We were in the hallway, her door open, my door open, Gerald moving between them with his usual authority, and she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me and said almost to herself, "I told you not to fall for me." "You did. Good thing you didn't listen." "Good thing you didn't either." She looked at me, the quiet eyes, the careful face that had learned, slowly, to be a little less careful around me, and then she smiled fully without holding it back. And it was the same as that first morning in the hallway with the plate of food she'd made too much of on purpose. The same person, only now I knew her, and knowing her was the thing I had stayed for.